Hi, everybody. Today we're going to be talking to you guys about the narrative paradigm. My name is Allison, and I'm going to start with the overview. So, the narrative paradigm is based on the research of Walter Fisher. It's interpretive, and it promotes the belief that humans are storytellers and that values, emotions, and aesthetic considerations ground our beliefs and behaviors. So stories help us to make sense of the world around us, and we tend to be more persuaded by a good story than a good argument. But what is a paradigm? A paradigm refers to an effort to formalize and direct our understanding of experience of all human communication. Basically, it is just broader than a theory, and paradigms use words to make sense of the real world. So I've listed some assumptions of the narrative paradigm up here. Basically, it says that humans are natural storytellers, and these stories have good reason. Good reason is determined by history, biography, culture, and character, and rationality is based on people's judgments of a story's consistency and truthfulness, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. And then we experience the world as filled with stories, and we choose from among those stories. In contrast, there's the rational world paradigm. Humans are rational beings according to this paradigm, and decision making is based on arguments. Arguments adhere to very specific criteria, and rationality is based on the quality of knowledge and formal reasoning processes. So, in essence, to the rational world paradigm, the world is a series of logical relationships that are uncovered through reasoning. And this is definitely contrasting the narrative paradigm because in the narrative paradigm, it's a little bit more interpretive, talking about humans are storytellers, it's very humanistic, whereas I would consider the rational world paradigm to be a little bit more scientific. So narratives are any verbal and nonverbal account with sequence of events to which listeners apply meaning. And according to Fisher, all communication is narrative and all life is composed of narratives. So narrative rationality provides with a means for judging narratives, the ones that we just talked about, that's different from traditional methods in the rational world paradigm. And it operates on two principles, which are coherence and fidelity. Coherence is just the consistency of the narrative. There's three types: structural, material, and characterological. Structural just has to do with the general flow of the story. Material is the congruence, the similarity between two different stories, and characterological is the believability of characters in that story. Fidelity, on the other hand, judges the credibility of the story. It's the truthfulness or reliability of a story, and when stories are true, they resound with listeners, they ring true. So next, the logic of good reasons. This is a set of values for accepting a story as true and worthy of acceptance, and it provides a method for assessing fidelity. There's two series of 5 questions. I've listed them up here, and to go through these questions, it'll help you find more fidelity within the story that you're listening to. I'm now going to pass it on to Grant, and he's going to talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of the paradigm. Thank you.
All right, my name is Grant, and I'm here to talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of Walter Fisher's narrative paradigm. So, first off, on the strengths, it's a wildly strong thing as long as you have two things, and that's going to be coherence, which is the internal consistency of your stories, and arguably way more importantly, fidelity, which occurs when our stories strike a responsive chord in the life of the listener. So, just for example, the textbook gives Hitler's Mein Kampf as an example of this. Basically after World War One, like the country's just a shattered wreck of itself. The people are destitute, poverty-stricken, starving, and there's just searching for any explanation as to why they're in the situation that they're in. And Hitler understands this, and so he puts forward this radical, horrible, not at all logical answer that has an ungodly amount of fidelity. Doesn't even really have that much coherence, but like he understands that the German people have all just shared an experience together. They've gone through World War One, and he understands how they feel, and so he knows that all they're looking for is hope and a plan. And so, even though what he puts forward is like a horrible idea, it works wildly well. It works better than any logical argument any German senator in the Reichstag could have possibly made at the time, which is like pretty incredibly powerful when you think about it. The flip side of that is that its reliance on fidelity and to a lesser extent coherence is also kind of one of its glaring weaknesses. So Fisher's narrative paradigm is heavily reliant on what the receiver's point of view is. This means that their distinct viewpoint in life, all your unique experiences, will determine, if they think a story is relevant and meaningful. And so, this is a weakness for a few reasons, because as your group grows larger, and this is just generally speaking, it naturally becomes more diverse. I mean, think about like America today. Like, we're just a wildly divided, large nation. And this means that your story can be interpreted wildly differently. Like, for example, I remember like 5 years ago, Donald Trump was running for election, and he basically said he's trying to frame himself as like the embodiment of like the American dream. And he's like, I got my start with a small loan of $1 million, and look at everything that I've built, this massive empire. Like, this is what America's about, like going from nothing to something. And I remember at the time, like, I was working in the library making like $8.50 an hour. I had like one real meal like a week, and the rest of it was ramen, and it just like blew my mind that like that's the story that he pitched. That like he thought that he was the embodiment of the American dream, that he was like, the large percentage of our population, like the middle class, and like, even the lower class. Like, I've never had $1 million in my life, and like I'm never gonna have like the opportunity for someone to just give that to me. And so like the way he framed his story was that he was like a self-made man. But because our experiences in life were so different, because the fidelity of his story did not match up at all to mine, like I interpreted his story wildly different, which was that like he was kind of out of touch with reality. Like I didn't have that experience. And so like, even though he intended that story to be like relatable and like such a positive way to look at America, it really highlighted for me everything wrong with America, which is that like there are people that have just like a wild amount of, privilege and opportunities, like so much more than anyone else, and I don't have access to it, and that like really soured my image of him. That's just an example. So just kind of a takeaway. End of the day, like, unless you really, really know your audience on an intimate level, you're never going to know exactly how they're going to interpret your story. And I think that's what makes it so wildly problematic, is that because it relies so heavily on almost an emotional appeal, it's difficult as the group gets larger. But it is incredibly powerful when used on a small scale, like in interpersonal relationships and things like that. And yeah, that's about all I have.
Hi, my name is Jamia, and today I'll be talking about the seminal works and the seminal studies associated with the narrative paradigm. So basically, I'll just start off by giving the definition of seminal works, and then we'll jump right into just a little bit of comparing and contrasting and what kind of makes Walter Fisher credible in the sense of his theory narrative paradigm. So the definition of seminal works is sometimes called pivotal or landmark studies, are articles that initially presented an idea of great importance or influence with a particular discipline. To kind of give you guys that compare and contrast factor, We're going to talk about just an example of another seminal works and why it was credible. And so I'm going to talk about Michael E. Porter. It was a 1996 article entitled "What is Strategy?" and it's considered a seminal work because it provided a clear and widely accepted definition of strategy, and it discounted many alternative views of what strategy is. And basically, that's to make sure that the seminal studies will kind of go hand in hand with Walter's work. We want to make sure that he kind of gave a good definition of storytelling, and then he gave a good definition of branding. Because basically storytelling and using storytelling in different career fields is a different form of branding, and it's basically how who can tell this story best, and that's kind of why we choose different brands of different just like different things, or like different clothing brands, like who told that story best. So to kind of go a little bit deeper into that, and talking about branding and storytelling, it says the narrative processing can create or enhance connections between a brand and an audience. Companies and businesses use stories or brands that suggest a story to produce brand loyalty. Businesses invest heavily in creating a good story through advertising and public relations. In brand development, many marketers focus on defining a brand persona, and basically, a persona is a typical user before constructing a narrative for that brand. Character traits such as honesty, curiosity, flexibility, and determination become embedded in the typical user. Commitment to the associated behavioral implications can help the brand maintain consistency with its narrative. And basically, it's just seeing who can be the most consistent. So, like, if this company is appealing to emotions, are they going to keep continuing appealing to emotions? If they're going to be targeting the children in one commercial, are they going to target the parents next and get everybody in the household on board? And it's basically how storytelling is kind of shaped all of this, because it's just like, in a sense, most commercials are storytelling, and it's appealing to emotions in a sense, whether it's making you angry or it's making you happy or it's making you want to cry. In a sense, it's all telling a story in the 30 seconds or in the minute that the commercial does last. And I think Walter did a great job with kind of making this theory and giving it like a breakdown, because it's something that is used on a daily, and it is used in most of the fields that most of us in this college and in this class are probably going to go into, such as advertising or public relations. So I think that it was a job well done. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Michelle.
Walter Fisher believes it is in our nature to be storytellers. According to our book, Walter Fisher is a professor at the University of Southern California, Annenberg School of Communications. He is convinced that we are narrative beings who experience and comprehend life as a series of ongoing narratives, as conflicts, characters, beginnings, middles, and ends. If this is true, then all forms of human communication that seek to affect belief, attitude, or action need to be seen as fundamentally as stories. In the past, storytelling was used to pass down history and traditions. For example, most religious traditions are passed on from generation to generation through the retelling of stories. According to Carrie Hawley's Journal on Rethinking Texts, Narrative, and the Construction of Qualitative Research, this theory is known as an interpretive form of communication and is useful for teaching qualitative research methods. A few areas it is used in is family interaction and advertising. When families get together, they tell stories and talk about things that are in the past, present, and future. There is one story that comes to mind when my family gets together. My grandfather always tells the story of how, when I wasn't even old enough to walk, my dad bought me non-skid socks, and everyone thought it was so funny. It is also common for my family members to bring up those who have passed away to keep their memories alive. Narrative paradigm would study why it is common for my grandfather to bring up this story every time we meet, and why we tell stories of those who have passed away. Another area this theory is used in is advertising. Advertising, it is common for companies to tell stories that relate to their products. For example, Hallmark uses the art of storytelling in their advertisement called Mom's Love is for Always. This advertisement video shows that although her daughter is growing up, her love for her daughter will never change. This appeals to our pathos, allowing us and those who are mothers and daughters to connect emotionally to this advertisement and this narrative. Narrative paradigm would use this story and analyze its effects on the viewers, whether or not they connected to this story or not, and if this story has allowed them to be encouraged to use Hallmark. Narrative paradigm is a theory that does not focus on the numbers. Rather, it prefers to focus on the structure of the narrative, the resemblance between stories, the credibility of the characters, and the relatability.
In conclusion, narrative paradigm can be summarized as a theory that suggests that human beings are natural storytellers and that a good story is more convincing than a good argument. When people communicate by the use of telling or observing a compelling story, the message resonates with the audience or recipient more than producing evidence or constructing a logical argument. This theory is timeless and is how we share our history and traditions. A prime example that was included in the presentation was religion and the series of narratives used to share it and pass it down from generation to generation. Although the use of this theory does make it difficult to accurately determine how others, especially those who we do not know, will potentially interpret these stories, since everyone does come from different backgrounds, which gives each individual a unique lens to view the sender's stories, the benefits outweigh the cost, in the sense that this theory resonates and persuades an audience more effectively, as well has the potential to significantly impact the receiver. Walter Fisher summarized this perfectly by stating that he is convinced that we are narrative beings who experience and comprehend life as a series of ongoing narratives through conflict characters, beginnings, middles, and ends, essentially making all human communication to be seen fundamentally as stories. Narrative paradigm plays a role in our daily lives more than we realize, whether it be the stories we share with our friends and families, going to church on Sundays, the history we've been learning in school our whole lives, or the advertisements we watch on TV nightly. All of them can successfully catch our attention with the use of intriguing stories rather than providing straight statistics or scientific facts that don't resonate as well.